Thank you very much, Julian. Really is an honour and a delight to be with you this morning. In fact, I think the topic of sleep is going to span all the domains of the presentations today. I have a bit to contribute to each of them. I can sort of hear some of you thinking, why is this chap talking about sleep when he looks completely shattered? Yes, I could sense that. But as Julian knows, I spent the last 4 weeks, 5 weeks, putting together this major grant. This is the delicious irony. This major grant to understand the neuroscience of sleep. 5 labs, and it's been like nailing jelly to the wall. So I'm a bit shattered. Anyway, what I'd like to do is talk about sleep. And really, time to take charge, time to embrace sleep as an essential part of our biology. And I thought I'd divide the presentation into 3 sections. Talk about the importance of sleep, what's going on within the brain and the body whilst we sleep, and why we need to prioritize it. Then talk about the impact of sleep disruption. And I think the key thing is, sleep disruption is so much more than the inconvenience of feeling tired at an inappropriate time, but it has a massive impact upon our global health. And the third thing, which is the good news bit, is, well, what can we do as individuals to improve our sleep? And indeed, as employers, what can we do to increase the sleep of our workforce? Okay, let's kick off with the importance of sleep. And I think we need to put sleep into context. And Julian sort of did this with his own data. And what this is a published report about how people divide up their 24-hour day. These individuals are between 25 and 54 with children. And you see that on average, 37% of the day is spent working and getting to and from work. Yours, I think, was 42, so very, very close there. Then leisure and sport, 10.5%. Household activities, 4.2%. Eating and drinking. Caring for others is surprisingly small in this particular sector. Then other stuff. And then here's the sector, sleep. In this particular age group, it's about 32%. Across the lifespan, it's 36%. So over a third of our lives will be spent asleep. And that fact alone must tell us that sleep at some level is important in doing something. And yet, despite this prodigious amount of time spent asleep, we ignore it, we marginalize it. In fact, current attitudes towards sleep are encapsulated by good old Thomas Edison, who of course he didn't invent, he commercialized the light bulb. And as a result, we as a society invaded the night. And of course, sleep was the first victim. And in a sense, his attitudes towards sleep are very much, I think, encapsulated by this statement. Sleep is a criminal waste of time and a heritage from our cave days. And still, many people think of sleep as an indulgence and a luxury. It's something that we need to sort of, I suppose, have. It's a bit like an illness that needs a cure. So let's now think about what's going on, what critical processes are going on in the sleeping brain. And the first 3 domains are in what the brain is actually doing. So there's the laying down of memories, our ability to take in information during the waking state and then consolidate that to memory is largely going on whilst we're asleep. Processing of information, it's not just the sort of laying down of memories, but it's the manipulation of information. And I'll show you a wonderful experiment in a moment on that. But also it's worth bearing in mind that the tiredness state of the brain will define to some extent the things that you remember and the things that you ignore. So tired brains remember the bad stuff that happens to you, but you do not remember the positive stuff. So there's a negative salience in a tired brain. But let's go to this point here, the processing of information. And some data collected by Jan Born in 2004 in what is an absolutely classic study. And can you let me know if I fall off the stage here? Just shout. So what he devised was a problem-solving task, and the details are unimportant. And he had 3 groups. The first group were introduced to the task in the morning, and they performed it that afternoon. And about 20% of the individuals solved the problem. The second group, introduced to the task in the morning, then performed it the following day in the afternoon, but they were deprived of sleep. So nicely controlling for fatigue here, both about 20%. This is the exciting group, introduced in the morning, like everybody else, performed it the following day, the following afternoon, but they had a night of sleep, and the percentage solving the problem went up to 60 to 70%. This is a beautiful example, highly statistical. that sleep promotes the ability to come up with novel solutions to complex problems. And of course, societally, this is the stuff that we need to be dealing with. And sleep is the best cognitive enhancer that we have. Let's now consider some other processes going on within the brain. So the removal of waste products. Some very interesting papers have emerged over the past few years about the packaging up and removal from the brain of beta amyloid. Beta amyloid is this misfolded protein associated with dementia and Alzheimer's disease, and it's now clear that a lot of that packaging up and removal is going on whilst we sleep. Now, I'm not saying that if you don't sleep, you're going to get dementia, but certainly sleep will promote the removal of these misfolded proteins and may be an important process in the development of dementia. Brain regulation, growth and repair. The release of the growth hormone, which is critical for tissue repair, is released almost exclusively whilst we sleep. If we don't sleep, we don't release that hormone and we reduce the tissue repair. Replacing energy reserves, rebuilding metabolic pathways, all of these things are going on. So absolutely critical biology. This is not an indulgence or a waste of time. No great surprise, in view of the time spent and all the stuff going on, sleep is the product of an interaction of all of the key brain neurotransmitter systems and multiple brain structures in the hindbrain, the midbrain, and the cortex, all interacting. And let's get back to light, because light detected by the eye by specialized photoreceptors, specialized light sensors, which we discovered. The optic nerve has a bunch of cells that arise from within the eye, and about 1 out of every 100 of those cells is directly light sensitive, and it's most sensitive to blue light. And it's these receptors that are detecting the light-dark cycle, which sets the internal clock, which then regulates the timing of the sleep-wake cycle. Those receptors are also changing levels of alertness, increase the amount of light, increase the amount of alertness, and they also seem to have an effect upon mood as well. So light is critically important in the regulation of sleep-wake processes. The key point I want to make is that the quality of our wake performance is largely defined by the quality of our sleep. And this is something we must embrace and we must take up on board. The other point I'd like to make is that what we see here is immense complexity. All of those key neurotransmitters, all of those brain structures, all interacting, the appropriate exposure to the light-dark cycle, and we'll discuss that in a moment. And what this means is that this complexity makes the sleep-wake process extremely vulnerable to disruption. And so let's now look at some of the effects of sleep-wake disruption. The impact of sleep disruption. And I want to consider 3 domains. The first is essentially short-term disruption, the sort of thing that most of us have experienced from time to time. The sort of thing I've experienced over this last 4 or 5 weeks putting this bloody grant together. So, loss of attention, high levels of microsleeps. It's worth bearing in mind that some statistics from states have suggested that 100,000 of the crashes on the freeway in the States are as a result of people falling asleep at the wheel. And these sorts of microsleeps are really dangerous because you literally fall asleep and you've got no capacity to see the problem. So you're going at high speed and you're smashing into another vehicle. And so many of these are associated with fatality. So this is not only a high level of crashes on the motorway, but also high levels of fatality. We'll see another example of a microsleep in a moment. The failure to process information, you simply can't work out what's being said to you. And there's a classic example there of the Exxon Valdez, that oil tanker that hit the reef off of the northwest coast of the United States. In fact, the captain was asleep in his cabin. He was drunk, but he was away. And there was this sort of inexperienced, tired person in charge, and he was being told, turn the bloody ship. I just couldn't process the information and crashed into the reef, and the ecological consequences of all that. Impulsivity increases hugely. You do ridiculously impulsive things. So you go for that red traffic light. You think you can make it, but you can't. The loss of empathy, the failure to pick up the social signals and of your friends and your family, and a negative focus, which we've touched on. You essentially dwell on the miserable stuff. Memory impairment we've touched on, increased mistakes, you're simply not processing information appropriately, and reduce cognition and creativity. So short-term sleep disruption, and that can be 24 hours up to several weeks, has a major impact on our ability to process information and interact in a social world. If we move to longer-term sleep disruption, the sort of thing that we see with those chronically sleep deprived, those people getting 4 hours of sleep every night, or indeed night shift workers, we see evidence of immune suppression. That immune suppression, probably driven by the stress axis that we heard about earlier. High levels of stress hormone can reduce the effectiveness of the immune system, which may be the basis for higher rates of infection and cancer that you see in long-term night shift workers, increased cardiovascular disease, a risk of diabetes 2 and other metabolic abnormalities, some very, very interesting data emerging there, and increased stimulant and sedative use, which we'll touch on in a moment. The third domain is essentially mental illness vulnerability. If you are predisposed to mood instability or anxiety or a range of other conditions, then sleep disruption can slide you into that pathological dangerous state. So anxiety, paranoia, hallucinatory experiences, and indeed there's an exacerbation of symptoms in bipolar and schizophrenia. So again, the point I'm trying to make is that sleep disruption across the sort of domain has massive health implications. Let's look at some examples. This is the classic 2010 Air India Express. Absolutely tragic. This little lad survived this appalling crash. And what was happening is that the pilot was landing the plane and then fell asleep during the landing process, one of these microsleeps, and then the plane hit the deck. How do we know that the pilot had fallen asleep? Well, you could hear him snoring on the voice recorder as he hit the deck. Quite extraordinary. The tired brain, how it responds. So the alarm clock gets you out of bed in the morning and you're chronically sleep deprived. The first thing the tired brain will seek out is stimulants. So caffeine in caffeinated drinks such as coffee. If you're a really naughty tired brain, and I know some of you are here that do smoke, will seek out nicotine, again an extremely effective stimulant. The problem is with those stimulants, particularly caffeine, is that they last in the body for a long time. Caffeine can last for 5 to 9 hours, depending upon who you are. And so then after a day driven by stimulation, you reverse that at night with sedation. And that can be in the form of sleeping tablets or indeed alcohol. Now the key point here is that these are deeply effective sedatives, but they do not provide a biological mimic for sleep. In fact, alcohol and certain sedatives can actually disrupt some of those important processes going on, such as memory consolidation and the processing of information. So this stimulant feedback loop, and I can see several of you nodding in appreciation that, oh my God, that's a description of my life. Be aware what you're doing. And the third area I just wanted to touch on to illustrate some of those points I mentioned earlier is mental illness. And across the mental illness spectrum, from depression to schizophrenia, what we and others have found is that it's strongly correlated with insomnia. In this paper from, 2011, it was estimated that over 80% of these individuals were reporting some, with a mental health problem, were reporting some form of insomnia. In our experience, it's more like 100%. So there's this very strong correlation. And we can talk about some of the basis for that correlation, perhaps in the coffee period afterwards. But the good news is that, and this is a study from Oxford led by Dan Freeman in our team, is the use of sleep stabilization to reduce, in this case, levels of paranoia. And so these were individuals who were showing levels of low levels of mental health problems. And this is the control group, this is beforehand, and then this is, they had no intervention. And then the intervention group is their pre-levels, and then they had a cognitive behavioral therapy which partially stabilized their sleep-wake. And you get a beautiful statistical reduction, in this case in their levels of paranoia, and the paper also studied levels of hallucinatory experiences. So the good news here is that we can use sleep as a potential therapeutic target to at least reduce the severity of some of these mental health states. And I think that, going forward, is a particularly exciting area. Okay, now in the last few minutes, what can we do? And first of all, as an individual, what should we be doing about our sleep? And it's taking control. It's prioritizing our sleep, and it's simple stuff. So first of all, developing good sleep habits. If we look, for a moment I didn't think it was going to peel back. So, obvious things: remove the televisions, the computers, the social media. Make the sleeping space a haven for sleep. It's so obvious, it hardly needs stating. And keep the sleeping space dark, but not too warm and quiet. It's very interesting, many British bedrooms are way too warm. Some very dodgy practices going on in British bedrooms, actually, in this regard. And of course, that heat actually prevents, it will inhibit sleep initiation. So not cold, but slightly cool. And of course, quiet. Invest in comfortable bed, mattresses, and pillows. I mean, it really does make a difference. And what some people also do is associate the sleeping space with a particular smell, whether it be lavender or whatever. The mechanisms of how that works are unclear, but it's an association. You associate your sleeping, relaxation space with a particular smell, and that may help. Try to maintain a consistent bedtime and wake time, both on work days and on free days. If you wake, and many people do wake up, and it's really fascinating because people who wake up and think, oh my God, I'm never going to get back to sleep, that's it, I'm going to go off and do my emails and have a cup of coffee. Not true. Many people wake and you can get back to sleep. You minimize light exposure, don't lay in bed frustrated, but relax somewhere else. You may want to listen to music, you may want to read a relaxing book, then return to the bed. Adopt a regular routine that you find particularly relaxing, such as reading or listening to music for 30 minutes or more prior to bed. Get into the sleep space. Now, this is interesting. If you can't cope with your bed partner snoring, find an alternative, and not find an alternative partner, which is why I actually gave a talk fairly recently where the bottom of the slide had been cut off, and I actually found an alternative partner. But alternative sleep space. This does not reflect upon your relationship. It's quite important. Minimize light exposure 30 minutes before desired sleep time and keep lights as low in the sleeping space as possible. Increased light increases alertness, delays sleep onset. Eat at the same time and finish the final meal of the day no later than 3 hours before the desired bedtime. Avoid caffeinated drinks, as we've discussed, in the afternoon and certainly not before sleep. Avoid the use of alcohol or other sedatives, which we've discussed. Engage in regular physical exercise, but not within 4 hours of going to sleep. You raise core body temperature, and as I say, high core body temperature can prevent sleep initiation. Avoid stressful situations before bedtime. Why my wife always wants to discuss the financial debate just before we go to bed. Crazy. Avoid napping. If you nap, then not for longer than 20 minutes and never 4 hours before you go to sleep. And we can talk about napping in a bit more detail. Okay, for the last few moments, I wanted to talk about light again. Getting the correct light exposure. Now, light does different things at different times of the day. So if you're an evening type, a late type, then seek out morning light, put the alarm clock on, go outside, get the morning light, and that will advance the clock. It will make you more of an early type. Now, if you happen to be a morning type, very rare, but they exist, and then seek out evening light exposure, and that will delay the clock, and that will make you get up a bit later. All this stuff we can make available via Julian. So, what about as a leader? What can you be doing? And there are key things that we can do for our employees who are at risk. High frequency health checks, correct lighting, technology, appropriate nutrition, sleep education, and care with the use of digital devices. Let's just touch briefly on each of these. So, high frequency health checks. It's all about catching the problems early. We've said that sleep-deprived individuals, such as long-term night shift workers, have increased cardiovascular disease, cancer, obesity, diabetes, metabolic, gastrointestinal problems. Why not introduce higher frequency health checks for these vulnerable individuals? And just to illustrate that point, let's look at cancer. The difference between whether you catch cancer, whether it be breast, prostate, cervical, colorectal, early versus late, determines hugely your long-term survival over that 5-year period. I mean, prostate cancer is extraordinary. 100% survival if it's caught early, drops to 29% if it's caught late. So, I think what we could do, again, as perhaps a duty of care, is high frequency health checks for those at risk of sleep disruption. The correct lighting. We've touched upon this. The biological clock needs quite a bit of light to set it to the external world. And so this is a study done by Aus van Sumeren in the Netherlands in the nursing home environment. This is 2:20 in the afternoon, and these individuals were exposed to 20 lux. Now you need 2,000 lux or more to robustly regulate the clock. If you sit by a window, it's about 3,000 lux. So what he did was increase the amount of light in the day areas, and the consequences of that were a major improvement of sleep-wake timing. It consolidated the sleep-wake timing. There was increased cognition by about 10%. It slowed cognitive decline, reduced levels of depression, and improved the capacity for daily living. And this is a great example of how we could improve lighting in the domestic and the work situation across many domains. Technology to help vigilance. I think this is something that is low-hanging fruit, frankly. A study published a couple of years ago on junior doctors, and it basically showed that 57% of them had either had a crash or a near miss after the night shift on the way home. So what could we do? Well, you could help use these drowsiness detection devices. Essentially, you clip them onto the dashboard, it detects whether the head is bobbing or the eyes are rolling, it alerts the factor that you're falling asleep. And this is simple technology. It's now incorporated in many high-end German cars. And again, duty of care by an employer to provide such devices. I think there is. Appropriate nutrition. Shift workers are more vulnerable to all of these factors: diabetes, metabolic, obesity. What do we give them to eat on the night shift? Well, it's stuff like this: high fat, high sugar. What we should be providing our night shift workers is stuff that's high protein, easy to digest, and small packages. We don't. There's almost no attention to nutrition on the night shift work at all. Sleep education. Sleep and well-being can be influenced by 3 factors. We provided a sleep education package which considers the science of sleep, sleep hygiene, some of the factors I talked about, and critically, as we heard from Philip, stress management. All these 3 taken together have been shown to improve sleep. And we've done this in one of the most resistant groups out there, which are teenagers. So we developed a package like this for the teachers to teach their students, 8 30-minute sessions, and the data were absolutely extraordinary. This is the level of insomnia prior to the sleep education intervention, and afterwards these kids fell outside of the clinical range of insomnia. This is about 25% of the cohort we looked at. So sleep education alone can be very powerful in improving our sleep. And it's not just teenagers. Sleep education could play a potentially important role in helping individuals get better sleep and for partners to understand the negative changes in behavior. What I mean by that, for shift work couples with children under 19 years old, the risk of divorce increases by up to 6 times when one of the spouses works between midnight and 8 a.m. as compared to daytime workers. So we've got to address this whole area, I think, with education. Finally, care with digital devices. So in theory, devices that monitor your sleep should be very useful. And in the same way that we would use scales to measure weight loss, this weight loss would reinforce our weight loss behavior, which will then promote a behavioral change. So this is the sort of logic that you could use for improving one's sleep. The real problem at the moment is that these devices are not validated. They can be profoundly misleading and actually stress-inducing. People come up to me and say, I'm doing as much as I possibly can, but my device is still telling me I'm not getting enough sleep. What can I do? So ironically, they're generating the stress, which is making their sleep worse. So I think we've got to be very careful about those sorts of digital devices that report to measure sleep. They really are, in some cases, really poor. So that's it. What I hope to do in the last 15 minutes, I may have been a bit longer, was sort of highlight the importance of sleep. As I said earlier, sleep is this extraordinary behavior that allows us to function at optimal levels when we're awake. If you don't get enough sleep, you have global health problems, not just short-term brain function, but overall physiology and behavior. But finally, there's stuff we can do. I think so many people feel that there's nothing I can do about my sleep. I'm handed out my sleep and that's it. Well, there's lots one can do. And the key thing is to prioritize sleep and define how much sleep that you need and then defend it. Thank you.